Welcome to Wisdom and Wealth, a channel dedicated to exploring profound truths and practical wisdom for a richer life, especially designed for those of us navigating midlife and beyond. Today, we're diving into a fascinating and potentially life-altering topic, the illusion of self, a concept deeply rooted in Buddhist teachings. This isn't about abstract philosophy, but about understanding something fundamental about your own experience. You know, that quiet certainty we all carry around, I am. It's a feeling so intrinsic that we hardly ever question it. Before we go any further, if you're finding value in this kind of content, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us bring more of these insights to you, and it lets YouTube know that these topics matter. Thank you. This I feels like the silent observer, the one behind our eyes, the listener behind our ears, the experiencer of every sensation. It's so familiar and constant that we rarely ask ourselves, what exactly is this I? We typically assume it's a singular, unchanging entity, separate from our ever-shifting thoughts and emotions. We believe it's the author of our lives, the decision-maker, the rememberer, the reactor. But have we ever truly found this self? Have we directly perceived it? Or have we just assumed its existence because we believe that experience needs a central figure? The Buddha posed this very question, not to instill doubt, but to open the door to genuine liberation and understanding. He encourages each of us to question even our most basic beliefs. He realized that this unquestioned belief in a separate, lasting self wasn't just unexamined, but deeply problematic. Beneath this belief lies a powerful craving, the innate urge to exist, to endure, to maintain a sense of me throughout life's inevitable changes. As the Buddha taught in the Dhammapada, from craving springs grief, from craving springs fear. When this imagined I feels threatened, fear arises. When its desires are thwarted, suffering ensues. Our attachments, our pride, our anxieties, they all revolve around this unverified center. The self, therefore, isn't just a harmless assumption. It can become the root of much of our unhappiness, the very engine driving our grasping and discontent. If you are enjoying this, like and subscribe to this Buddhist doctrine channel. Now, this isn't about religious dogma or airy-fairy philosophical debates. This is a direct challenge to the most fundamental assumption we hold, that deep-seated belief in a persistent and independent me. What if this thing we've always called self, this background sense of me, isn't what we think it is? What if it's not a static thing at all, but a dynamic process, an illusion, a deeply ingrained mental habit? The invitation here isn't to blindly accept this idea, but rather to embark on a journey of profound self-inquiry, a journey conducted with care, honesty, and open awareness. This exploration can lead to a deeper understanding of what constitutes your being, and why so much of it doesn't necessarily define you. If you are enjoying this, like and subscribe to this Buddhist doctrine channel. Now that we've raised some questions about the nature of the self, let's delve deeper, not through speculation, but through direct experience and mindful examination. The Buddha offered a powerful method in the Anattalakkhana Sutta, also known as the Discourse on the Characteristic of Not-Self. In this teaching, he invited his first 5 disciples to investigate experience directly, not through blind faith, but through careful observation. What we call a person, he explained, isn't a single, unified entity, but rather a dynamic combination of 5 ever-changing processes, known as the 5 aggregates, pancakanda. Critically, none of these aggregates, whether considered individually or collectively, can rightfully be labeled a permanent and unchanging self. The first aggregate is form, rupa, which refers to the physical body, skin, bones, organs, cells, everything that constitutes our material form. The Buddha declared, form is not self. Why? Because the body is in a constant state of flux, continually breaking down and rebuilding itself. Your body isn't a static object, but rather a dynamic process. Food becomes tissue, cells die and regenerate, bones grow and decay. To claim, I am this body, is akin to a single wave claiming to be the entire ocean, or a flame insisting that it will never flicker. The body is in constant transformation, aging, experiencing illness, and ultimately, facing death. Something inherently impermanent cannot be the stable and unchanging self that we often imagine it to be. The second aggregate is feeling, Vedana, encompassing the sensations of pleasure, pain, or neutrality that arise in our experience. The Buddha stated, feeling is not self. Why? Because feelings are inherently transient, fleeting experiences. Joy transforms into boredom, sadness fades into relief. They arise, linger briefly, and then vanish. If you believe, I am my feelings, then you are constantly dying and being reborn with every passing emotional state. Something so unstable and ephemeral cannot possibly be the core of who you truly are. Third is perception, sana, the mind's labeling and categorizing function. It recognizes patterns, assigns names to forms, and interprets experiences. Seeing a tree as a tree, hearing sounds as language, identifying someone as a friend, this is perception at work. However, perceptions are inherently subjective and constantly evolving. What you fear today might seem harmless tomorrow. What you once loved might now feel distant or even repulsive. If perception is constantly in flux, how can it possibly represent an unchanging self? It's akin to mistaking a map for the actual terrain, confusing the symbols for a fixed reality. The fourth aggregate is mental formations, sakra, encompassing the thoughts, intentions, habits, and emotional tendencies that shape our responses to the world. These are the factors that give rise to our impulses and preferences. We often like to believe that, I choose my thoughts. However, the vast majority of our thoughts arise from a complex interplay of conditions beyond our conscious control, upbringing, mood, social influences, and countless unconscious patterns. Even our seemingly deliberate choices are shaped by a web of prior causes. As the Dhammapada states, all things are preceded by mind, led by mind, made by mind. But which mind? And where is the fixed I behind these ever-shifting thoughts? If your actions are conditioned by countless factors, then the notion of a freely acting, independent agent becomes highly questionable, much like a puppet mistaking its strings for free will. Finally, there is consciousness, via the basic awareness or knowing of experience. Consciousness isn't a constant and unwavering light, but rather an event. The Buddha taught that consciousness arises dependently, based on an object and a sense organ. Sight arises from the eye and a visible form, sound arises from the ear and a vibration, and so on. It's like a reflection in a mirror, it only appears when the necessary conditions come together. There is no self-sufficient, awareness entity lurking behind the scenes, just a continuous stream of dependently arising moments of knowing. So, what do we find when we thoroughly examine these five aggregates: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness? Not a self, but a dynamic system. Not a controller, but an ongoing chain of events. What appears as a me is simply a collection of impermanent and interdependent processes, changing too rapidly to grasp and too devoid of inherent substance to truly own. The Buddha didn't ask us to blindly accept this conclusion. He asked us to investigate and see for ourselves. And when we look with clarity and honesty, we begin to understand that the self isn't a pre-existing truth waiting to be discovered, but rather a story we've been telling ourselves and mistaking for reality. Even after a thorough examination of the five aggregates, even after recognizing that none of them, whether alone or in combination, can constitute a true self, that familiar sense of I often lingers. It doesn't simply vanish with intellectual understanding. It continues to whisper, I am here. Why? Why does this illusion persist so stubbornly, even when the evidence points elsewhere? The Buddha addressed this very question with piercing clarity in the Madhyapika Sutta. He meticulously laid out the chain of events through which experience becomes distorted, giving rise to the illusion of self. He explains that dependent on the I and forms, I consciousness arises. The meeting of these three elements constitutes contact. With contact as the condition, feeling arises. What one feels, one then perceives. What one perceives, one begins to think about. And finally, what one thinks about, one mentally proliferates. This final stage, known as papanka, or mental proliferation, is the crucial key. It's where the mind takes simple experience and spins it into a tangled web of stories and interpretations. A sound isn't simply heard, it becomes my annoyance. A sight isn't just seen, it becomes my preference. From the very moment an experience arises, the mind rushes in with narration, spinning stories of I, me, and mine. The illusion of self doesn't originate with the experience itself. It begins with the mind's innate compulsion to center everything around an imagined me. The self isn't the source or origin of experience, it's the character that our thoughts invent after the fact. Like a novelist adding a protagonist to lend coherence to a sprawling plot, the mind inserts a narrator who claims authorship over the entirety of life. Interestingly, modern neuroscience provides compelling support for this perspective. There is no singular command center in the brain, no self sitting at the controls. Instead, what we experience as me is an emergent process, a byproduct of numerous interconnected systems working in concert. One key system, known as the default mode network, is constantly constructing narratives to make sense of our lives, linking memories, imagining futures, and assigning a central character, you. Philosopher Daniel Dennett referred to this as the center of narrative gravity. Like the center of gravity in a chair, it's a useful way to describe balance and stability, but it isn't a physical part that you can isolate. The self is similar, not a thing, but rather a way in which the mind organizes and makes sense of the world. Before we finish, if you are enjoying this, like and subscribe to this Buddhist doctrine channel. This understanding brings with it a crucial warning. Recognizing the self as an illusion doesn't imply that nothing exists at all. That view, known as nihilism, is just as misguided as its opposite, eternalism, the belief in a permanent soul that endures forever. The Buddha explicitly rejected both extremes. In the Kaccayanagotta Sutta, he stated, everything exists is one extreme, while everything does not exist is the second extreme. Avoiding these two extremes, the Tathagata teaches the Dhamma by means of the middle way. So, what remains when we let go of these extremes? A conventional truth. Yes, we continue to speak in terms of I, you, and mine. This is practical and necessary for navigating daily life and social interactions. However, it's not the ultimate truth. When we investigate closely, we find no separate, lasting entity hiding behind those words, only process, only conditionally arisen experience. The self is real in the same way that a wave is real. You can point to it, describe it, and even measure it, but you cannot separate it from the ocean that gives it form. To say that the wave is just water is true, but to deny the wave's appearance altogether is also false. It exists, but not independently. It exists only as a transient movement within something far larger. In the same way, you exist, but not as the self you imagine yourself to be. You exist as a dynamic flow of causes and conditions, a pattern within the vast expanse of consciousness, a story told by a mind that has momentarily forgotten that it's writing fiction. This is the path of seeing, the journey from ingrained thought patterns to genuine transformation. Remember, if you are enjoying this, like and subscribe to this Buddhist doctrine channel. By this point, we've explored how the illusion of self is constructed, not from a single cause, but from countless mental habits accumulated over time. The natural question that arises is, how do we step out of this illusion? How do we stop being deceived by the very mind that creates it? Many people believe that the answer lies in more understanding, more analysis, and more thinking. However, this is often a trap. The same mind that builds the illusion of self cannot dismantle it through thought alone. As the Buddha emphasized in the Kalama Sutta, even logic, scriptures, or the authority of teachers are insufficient. Do not go by oral tradition, by lineage of teaching, by hearsay, by collections of texts, or even by reasoning. But when you know for yourselves. This knowing isn't conceptual, it's experiential. You cannot intellectualize your way out of a prison built by thought. Attempting to do so is like trying to escape a dream by dreaming more clearly. The illusion of self isn't shattered by clever arguments, it's dissolved by a fundamental shift in how we perceive reality. The Buddha didn't offer a philosophy to passively accept, he offered a training, a practical path to transform the way in which consciousness functions. This path isn't mystical or esoteric, it's structured, experiential, and accessible to all. Traditionally, it's expressed in 3 interwoven trainings: ethics, sila, concentration, samadhi, and wisdom, panna. Ethics is where the journey begins. This isn't about morality as a set of rules to obey or a source of guilt, but rather about creating the necessary conditions for inner clarity. A mind disturbed by regret, resentment, or deception is incapable of seeing deeply. Ethical living cultivates stillness, not just externally in our actions, but also internally in our thoughts and emotions. It removes the agitation that keeps the mind restless and fixated on itself. When you cease causing harm, both inwardly and outwardly, your inner landscape becomes quiet enough to perceive what is truly real. Concentration follows ethics, building upon the foundation of stillness. Through meditation, you train the mind to become steady, undistracted, and open. This isn't about forcefully controlling thoughts, but rather about gradually letting go of identification with them. As attention becomes more stable, something subtle and profound begins to happen. You start to notice that thoughts, feelings, and even the sense of I arise and pass away on their own. You no longer instinctively chase after them. You no longer automatically assume that they are you. Concentration isn't about repression, it's about cultivating intimacy without entanglement. It's the art of being present without clinging. Finally, there is wisdom, not knowledge in the intellectual sense, but a direct, unfiltered seeing. When the mind is calm, concentrated, and deeply attentive, it begins to see through appearances. It sees the impermanence, the conditionality, and the absence of a fixed core in all experience. You don't attain a mystical state called not self, you simply cease finding a self anywhere. You look into sensation, into thought, into perception, and you find no solid center. What once seemed like me is now revealed as a dynamic process. What once felt like possession now feels like an effortless flow. This shift isn't dramatic or sudden, it's more like a gradual and quiet falling away. The illusion collapses, not with a bang, but with a gentle and undeniable clarity. The mind stops clinging, not because it's been told to, but because it sees that there is truly nothing left to cling to. And with that, we come to the end of this video. This isn't the end of life, but rather the beginning of living without the constant grip of fear. Life without the illusion of self isn't empty or meaningless, it's profoundly free. We've explored the mechanics of this illusion, traced how the sense of self arises, how it clings, and how it can ultimately unravel. But what happens when it truly falls away? What remains when the idea of I no longer sits at the center of experience? This question often touches our deepest fears. If there is no self, what happens when we die? What gives life meaning if there is no permanent me? For many, this realization feels like staring into a terrifying void. However, the Buddha pointed to something far more profound. In the Udana, he spoke not of oblivion, but of the unconditioned. There is, monks, an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned. If there were not that unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned, there would be no escape from the born, become, made, and conditioned. This unborn isn't a realm beyond the clouds, an afterlife, or a mystical destination. It's the timeless reality that becomes visible when the entire machinery of becoming, of craving, clinging, and constructing self is brought to rest. It's not somewhere you go, it's what remains when the illusion no longer blinds you. Liberation isn't a disappearance into nothingness, it's a disentangling, a freeing of oneself from the constant pressure to become someone. When the burden of maintaining I and mine drops away, what remains is vast, quiet, open, and unshaken. So, What does life look like on the other side of this profound shift? Strangely, it often looks much the same, but it feels entirely different. The colors of the world remain vibrant. Relationships, actions, and speech all continue. But the anxious centrality dissolves. The constant narrative that declares, "This is all about me," gradually quiets down. You are no longer the protagonist desperately fighting for meaning, you become the spaciousness in which meaning naturally unfolds. You are no longer the wave struggling to last forever, you are the ocean, serenely allowing waves to come and go. You are no longer just the voice in the play, you are the stage, the light, the silence before and after each line. This isn't a loss of self, but rather the liberation from being limited to a self. It's not the death of meaning, but the discovery of a meaning that was never dependent on your personal story to begin with. The Buddha never asked us to blindly believe this, he asked us to look, to see for ourselves. You yourselves must strive. The Buddhas only point the way. Everything we've explored, these reflections, these words, aren't the moon itself, they are merely a finger pointing towards it. The real moon isn't found in thought or in this teaching, but rather in the stillness of your own direct seeing. The moment you cease chasing after a fixed identity, the moment you rest in the way things actually are, freedom is already here. But no one can walk this final step for you. This is your personal investigation, your path. And what awaits you isn't a void, but life itself, unbound and limitless. If you are enjoying this, like and subscribe to this Buddhist doctrine channel. Thank you.